Here are the 6 breaking cruise news stories that you need to know about, including the CDC in the United States dialing up its advice against cruising, 3 huge new challenges cruises that have resumed are now dealing with, what a Royal Caribbean cruise is actually going to be like, a big surprise financial bailout for the cruise lines, and more. I am Gary Bembridge, and this is another of my Tips for Travellers cruise updates, where I unpick the biggest cruising news and discuss what it means for all of us as cruisers. Firstly, a really significant development in the US of A. The CDC has significantly increased their travel advice against cruising, moving it from a level 2 up to a level 3, warning US residents to avoid all non-essential travel, especially cruising. They call out cruising in some detail in this update. Their advice says, and I quote, "The CDC recommends that travelers defer all cruise travel worldwide." They highlight the ongoing and increased levels of COVID-19 infection across many countries, including the USA, and argue, and again I quote, "Cruise passengers are at increased risk of person-to-person spread of infectious diseases, included COVID-19, and outbreaks of COVID-19 have been reported on several cruise ships." Now, the lifting of the no sail order is key to cruise lines being legally able to resume sailing. But this advice against cruising is also significant, as it usually negates travelers' insurance and, of course, deters many from traveling, making resumption really challenging for the lines. As I record this, some lines have already started to cancel and push cruises out even further, Virgin Voyages being one of the first cancelling right through to the 3rd of January. Although, at the same time, Carnival Cruises has brought back some crew into St. Martin to join Carnival Horizon, Carnival Pride, and Mardi Gras, although it's not clear if these are to replace crew in cold layup whose contracts have ended, or with an eye to resuming cruising. Meanwhile, across in Europe, we have seen 3 new issues the lines are now facing in recent days. First of all, the fast rising cases in some countries has made lines much more skittish and nervous about who they accept on their cruises. Carnival's Costa Cruises, for example, which resumed cruising with just Italian passengers, has cancelled plans to accept guests from other European countries whose cases are higher than in Italy. Costa was due to open to EU travellers, but now travellers from countries as far apart as France, Austria, Switzerland, Spain, the UK, Croatia, Poland, and Portugal cannot cruise with them. Now, the policy will be reviewed at the end of November, but they also have announced that they are extending the ban on US travellers through towards the end of December. The second challenge is that lines are having to get used to modifying itineraries at short notice, as travel advice keeps chopping and changing as infection rates develop. So, for example, Carnival's AIDA cruises, which cater for German-speaking travellers, had to overnight drop some Italian ports in regions the German government now advised against travel to. So they dropped popular ports like Naples, for example, and added Messina and Syracuse, where travel advice is still okay, certainly for now. This also means they abruptly dropped La Spezia in Italy as an embarkation port, and travellers can only embark their cruises in Civitavecchia near Rome. Crossy Europe, which was sailing on many rivers, has announced multiple cancellations, and they've scrapped their entire Christmas season sailings due to changing travel advice, changing restrictions on attractions, what hospitality is open, and all those kind of restrictions. Now, thirdly, the lines are discovering, as I covered in my last update, there is still, of course, risks of outbreaks on board despite testing, physical distancing, creating of bubbles for excursions, as we saw on Costa Diadema that I spoke about in my last update. But in recent days, for example, there was a reported outbreak on a river cruise in Germany on the MS Vista Serenity. It led to guests actually being transferred home to isolate and 13 crew testing positive. So though the new protocols mean quick identification and only having to isolate those infected or their close contacts, it does create a really difficult ongoing challenge that the lines are having to adapt and learn to manage. So certainly as cruises getting the go-ahead to resume is, as we are learning, just the start, lines have to keep adapting and changing who can sail, where they can call on, and how they handle the different flare-ups if and when they happen. However, in more positive news, we have confirmation on what cruising on a Royal Caribbean ship is really going to be like. So how do I know that? Well, by looking at what they've put in place as they resume cruising on the Quantum of the Seas out of Singapore. Overall, it's very, very consistent with what we've seen on Carnival's European lines sailing. So that's Costa Cruises, AIDA, and Royal Caribbean's joint ventures of Mein Schiff and Hapag-Lloyd lines. And also, importantly, things they included in the Healthy Sailing Panel proposals that they submitted to the CDC in the US. Now, there are 5 things that really stand out to me. Firstly, guests have to take a COVID-19 test 48 to 72 hours before boarding, but the cost of testing is included in the fare and it's arranged through the line. Now, if you or your party tests positive or fails the pre-board screening, you get 100% future cruise credit. So it's really good to finally know what happens if you can't go on a cruise because of COVID, because this applies also if you have to isolate and can't go on the cruise. It's good to get that answer. The other thing we found out is the ship will be sailing at maximum of 50% capacity, and all the venues, swimming pools, restaurant, bars, and so on, will operate at half their capacity, with numbers being controlled, and booking is required for most of the venues in advance. Only 4 people can be in an elevator at one time. A lot of people ask me that question as well. Thirdly, the Windjammer buffet will, as we expect, not be self-service. All the items will be served by crew, but it's recommended that guests book a time to go to the buffet. Now, this, of course, is not going to be popular with many. Fourthly, again, something that's not popular, masks are going to be required in almost all situations, except when you're eating or drinking and seated down. So masks are needed inside the ship, but also out on the deck when you're taking part in outdoor activities, except the flow rider, where it wouldn't stay on anyway. They even have to be worn around the pool when you're not in the water. Now, this is not the case on European cruises. The 5th thing that stood out is some really big modifications have been made to the ship, with new ventilation and filtration systems and a very expanded medical center, which now has more doctors, more nurses, and a dedicated isolation ward for COVID care patients. Importantly, also, Royal Caribbean will cover all COVID-19 related medical treatment on board, and also the cost of any quarantining off the ship and travel home if required. So it's also good to finally know how this is going to be handled and who's going to pay for it. So as you can see, these are pretty consistent with other cruises that have resumed to date, but we are now getting answers to some of those questions we all have been asking around things like who pays for what. Now, despite all of this, a lot of people are still skeptical that the cruise lines will really enforce all these new protocols and rules. Now, based on the news that keeps coming through, we are seeing really strict enforcement. I have previously covered MSC Cruises throwing guests off their cruises in Europe for breaking some of the new rules. And in the past week, Carnival's AIDA has done exactly the same. So one of the new rules is only being allowed to leave the ship on a cruise line excursion, and you can't leave that excursion to self-explore, visit a shop or bar or whatever. Now, a passenger on a cruise on AIDA Blue left one of their tours in Catania, Italy, and he was refused permission to reboard and had to organize getting himself back home to Germany. Now, I predict we will keep seeing stories like this when they occur, because cruise lines want potential cruisers to know sticking to their new protocols is non-negotiable and an absolute must. Now, technology is being ramped up as well to help with these new protocols and their enforcement. It wasn't a surprise to me, therefore, that another major cruise group is looking to add technology to help deliver more touchless services on board their ships and also improve the ability to do smarter track and trace on board as well. Royal Caribbean have now trademarked a wearable bracelet device called Tracelet, which sounds a lot like Carnival Corporation's Ocean Medallion that's been used by their Princess and Costa brands so far. And MSC Cruises, they have a wearable MSC for Me bracelet device. Now, although described as a bracelet, things like Ocean Medallion do come in different formats to suit how people may actually want to wear or carry these things. Now, these wearable devices are given to all the passengers, and they help track who they've been in close contact with for 15 minutes or more, and the data then enables much more specific track and trace. So if a guest shows COVID-19 symptoms, it should only allow those who've been in contact with them to have to quarantine, and avoids entire ships having to be put into lockdown, as happened in the run-up to the shutdown. So it's got to be a good thing, although I know people are skeptical. The wearable devices allow contactless opening of cabin doors, paying for items on board, ordering drinks and food when used with a phone app. So they do have many other applications. Increased technology and faster adoption of these wearable devices, I think, look to be another really key change coming out of this pandemic. Now, as workers affected by the shutdown of cruise ports in Florida held rallies in Miami, Port Everglades, in Fort Lauderdale, and Port Canaveral, lobbying for cruises to be allowed to resume, news has also come from that area that cruise lines have been given a substantial bailout. Now, the cruise lines, because they're flagged and registered out of the US, didn't qualify or get any bailout or assistance from the government in the US. However, Port Miami got Miami-Dade County to waive $285 million in fees that the cruise lines owe under minimum rent deals they signed years ago to use the docks, the terminals, and the garages owned by the county. So a big bailout. Now, these are the biggest news stories breaking that I felt you need to know about, and what I think they mean for us as cruise lovers. I have loads more Tips for Travellers episodes full of cruising advice and tips, so why not enjoy another one right now?